Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode two of Friday with Friends. And today I have a new friend of mine. Well, maybe we've been friends for about a year. We met on LinkedIn, so you kind of know the type of people we are. This is Zoe, and she's from Western Ivey. I wanted to bring her on because I think she has a bright, sparkly personality. As well, she's slaying in the corporate world as an early career. So I wanted to talk about that, and I relate to that, and I think many of you do as well. So I guess we can start. Zoe, first, could you share a bit about where you're from, your upbringing, a bit about high school, and why you decided to go to Ivey at Western?
Okay, 100%. So, hi guys, nice to meet you all. I'm Zoe, as Wynette mentioned. And fun fact, I actually started watching Wynette's university decision videos and her business school related content way before we met on LinkedIn and then in person. So it's been a long time coming getting on this channel. But okay, going back to kind of where I'm from. So I'm a born and raised Vancouverite. I grew up in Vancouver. And my background is half Chinese, half Irish. So kind of Asian tiger mom, if you will, the one pushing me for academic success. And then a lot more of a laissez-faire Irish father. So that was an interesting upbringing in itself. But I think the point that's most relevant to kind of why I went into Western, how I got into the business field is for high school, I actually went to an arts program high school in Vancouver. So my concentration was in drama, as in theater, performing arts. And then I switched into a literary arts program. So throughout high school, while a lot of my soon-to-be university peers were doing DECA, they were doing case competitions, Future Business Leaders of America, I never took a business course in high school. And I spent my weekends at dance rehearsal, and my most difficult courses were all essay writing courses. So business school, bit of a kind of different switch. And I also decided to move across Canada for it. And I think the decision to study business, very frankly, I didn't decide on that until late grade 11, maybe even early grade 12, which I feel like is pretty late. And like I mentioned, I didn't have any previous experience in it. And I did think about literally going into creative writing or going into drama. But I was number one, I kind of want to do something with a bit of practical value. Kind of came to that logical realization, if you will. And then I was always kind of a pretty academically inclined kid. I knew I could kind of function well in, let's say, a more high pressure, either career field or field of study. And my dad used to work in law. So I did actually really think about going into law school. So I was okay, logical paths for law school. One, I could go into essentially anything, but likely a social science degree. So something poli-sci, crim, history, all of which were fields I was interested in. And then I was or if I'm interested in corporate law, I could kind of go into business school and then see if I can get on the law pathway. So I have nixed the law path altogether, or almost altogether now, but kind of decided to go into business because I thought it had a lot of practical value. And I really saw myself getting more involved in the creative fields of business. So I was thinking marketing, HR, maybe even sales, something I could kind of use my people skills, my presentation skills in. And then as for Ivey and Western, number one, I wanted to move away from home. And I knew that if I were to build a career in Canada, I wanted to build it in Toronto, because I think that's kind of number one, the biggest city, which as a city girl, I just enjoyed. And then number two, the city with really the most career developmental opportunities in Canada. Ivey really sold themselves to me based on the case-based method. As a high schooler who knew nothing about business school, I was this is so cool. It's so unique. But originally my top choices were U of T and McGill, because I think coming from the West Coast, you don't really know that in Ontario, programs sort of go like, or university rankings go almost by program instead of overall rankings. So I applied for Western and Ivy as like a last minute application. I was like, you know what, this is my backup if I don't get into Rotman. Joke's on me, it's probably harder to get into Ivy. And then kind of had a big crisis slash decision making process actually deciding to go to Western, because I didn't want to be in a small town and I didn't want to be at a party school. But then I realized university is like a pretty short 4-year span of your life. And I was like, if I'm going to go to university, I'll go to a university town. I'll go to one of those kind of more like US like colleges. And I have the rest of my life to live out my big city girl dreams.
God, thank you for that. And I have to be real. And I would say it looks like you're thriving in that small university town. I couldn't tell that that was like a decision for you. So that's great. Now, how were the first 2 years at Western? Were you ever nervous about maintaining a certain GPA in extracurriculars to maintain AEO status? I know like I also got an AEO like offer and I was super nervous about that. That's probably the only reason why I didn't go. So could you talk about that a little?
100%. So direct answer to your question is yes, lots of pressure for sure. And especially going into first year, I did not know a single person at Western or who went to Ivy before. I think there were a few kids from my high school, but like in different programs in different years. So even like socially, I was like, I know no one. And I knew nothing about how Western worked and like what the business environment was like. I just knew, okay, I need extracurriculars and I need to maintain an 80 average. So on the academic side, like honestly, I think the hardest I ever worked was first semester of university, because I didn't know how easy or hard it would be to get an 80. And this is really cringe, but one of my favorite musicals, Legally Blonde, the musical, there's this line that's like, with the chance you've been given, you got to be driven as hell. I had that written on my wall and I'd like look at it every morning and I'd be like, grind, go study, work hard, right? Because I was like, I need to make it into Ivy. Otherwise, like I'm sitting here in London, Ontario for nothing, right? So definitely pressure on the academic side. But like managed to hit the average. And then kind of after first sem, like I realized what the grading system was like. And then I'd say I mellowed out a bit. But I think where there was even more pressure was kind of on the extracurriculars and within like the business environment and like the business circle at Western. Like I mentioned before, it seemed like all of my peers like used to do case comps in high school. They were their school's DECA Pres. And I literally rolled up and I was like, what is a case competition? And then everyone would be asking me, they'd be like, oh, what business clubs are you applying for? And I was like, there's business clubs. Like I remember very vividly sitting in the interview for like one of our top finance clubs, had no knowledge of finance. And my interviewer was this fourth year going into Morgan Stanley. And I Googled him before because I didn't even have LinkedIn at the time, like didn't know what LinkedIn was. And I was like, Morgan Stanley seems like an important firm. I should probably try to impress him. So like needless to say, came a long way with kind of having zero knowledge to like actually getting positions, like doing my case comps, like learning what networking is and kind of getting into that whole like business circle.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think the business circle is a big part of it. Like the things that you learn from osmosis, and not even in particular of a certain sector like finance or consulting, but understanding the mapping of the way the business world works. Like,
Yep.
you can go into tech, but there's also like technical and non-technical. And then you can go to consulting or investment banking, or you can go to entrepreneurship, like mapping that out and mapping out LinkedIn and the connections and just like how you get jobs and the competitiveness of each. Like those are things that you cannot learn unless you like go like face first into a business school, especially like Ivy, where everyone is talking about that. It's on their mind. It's part of their identity. It's in their blood. Like I know that sounds so cliche, but as someone that doesn't go to Ivy, like I think even you, Zoe, talking to you, you have like I can picture the map of the business world in your head. Like I feel like you know
No.
a lot about what's going on.
I will say as a disclaimer, like now that I'm in fourth year, kind of like taking a step back from it, I don't think any of this, like, yes, it matters to an extent. It's not critical at all. Like what case comps you win, like who you're able to network with, like what clubs you get into. But kind of in first year, like not knowing anything, it seemed like the end all be all. And with these like competitive clubs at Western, like filled with like super keen AEOs, I was like, wait a second, why is it harder to get into this club than it was to get into this school? Right?
Yeah.
And I will say, like, I gained value from like the case comps, the business clubs, kind of because I started at ground zero, right? It did help me build some level of business acumen. I learned like how to conduct myself in like a business adjacent professional meeting scenario, right? I learned like a couple of frameworks through the competitions I entered. But if you like already have that business acumen as a first year, I don't know if it offers enough incremental value, because at one point I did take like a pretty big step out of like the business community, the business bubble, if you will, because I was like, I feel like I gained what I was looking to learn. And now like there's not that much incremental value anymore. And I was like, okay, what are the one or two things that actually matter to me, that make an impact, that I feel like I have a purpose in?
Absolutely. I think, when you're starting out in university, it is so helpful. But, even me throughout my university, when I got into like end of second, third year, I started to do radio and do fitness because those are the things that like are important to me. And it's important that you have other things to ground you because, what if that job you're going for doesn't really work out? Well, is your identity gone? Like you got to have other things. So thank you for sharing that. Now, you have a very cool internship experience, one that honestly I'm jealous of. Could you share with us a bit about your entire internship journey so far?
Okay, that I can do. So kind of first year, this ironically relates to the business club scene at Western. But I got into an entrepreneurship club like almost by chance. I was like, yeah, entrepreneurship is cool. I suppose I'll apply. And then kind of through that club, got like a lot of networking opportunities and learned a lot about the tech startup scene in Toronto in particular. And I was like, okay, this seems really up my alley. This is really interesting. Um, and I was like, I need a first year internship, but like, what realistically can I land, right? As a high school student with kind of no experience. So I did mass apply everywhere, but I kind of focused my networking on like a couple of tech startups in Toronto that I knew people who previously worked at, or like my club had connections with. And that's how I landed my role at Relay Financial. I think, to be frank, in first year, you're kind of scraping at like whatever offer you're able to get. Um, but I did really, really enjoy my experience at Relay. And I was working in like operations slash customer support, like a very cliche first year job. Um, but I think it was a great way for me to like get exposure into like what a startup looks like. It was pretty early stage at the time. I think we started with 20 people, but what was really interesting is throughout the summer that I was there, the company was in a pretty rapid expansion phase. We just announced like I think 20 million in VC funding, which was
Mm.
like huge for us. So by the time I left, I think there were 40 to 50 people. So that was something really interesting to witness. And I think something really great that I did is, because it was so early stage, so small, I networked with our head of product, our head of marketing, our head of HR, like our CEO directly, even like software engineers, despite being completely non-technical. And I was like, wow, like there's such a wealth of opportunities within the tech space, within the startup space, which is what really got me interested in the startup world. And that's kind of what led me second year to working at Clearco, or previously Clearbank. Now, back when I worked there, they were like one of the major unicorns of Canada, like one of the roaring tech companies, kind of mid-sized tech, around 500 people when I joined, like a similar gist to like Wealthsimple or like the Neo Financials of the world. And I really wanted that job. Like, I thought Clearco was the coolest company. I thought Michelle Romanow was like the coolest boss you could possibly have. And I still have like nothing but great sentiments for that company. Truly, I've never witnessed such unique culture. And I think it's the best internship experience I could have possibly asked for. But like, very candidly, the company did take a bit of a turn, as well as like the tech scene in Canada in general. It was a very volatile 4 months. I think the key thing I learned was like change management and coping with ambiguity, which is again quite cliche. But I can promise you that I'd sometimes wake up and I'd be like, I don't know if the company's taking a new direction. I don't know if teams have been laid off. I don't know if my like all the work I've done last week is gonna like need to pivot into something new. Which again, I think is really valuable experience to gain early in your career, but definitely an unconventional internship. So kind of from that point, I was like, okay, I can kind of continue down my tech path. Or I can go into one of the most popular industries at Ivey, consulting, which I did have prior interest in that I'm happy to speak on later. And I kind of decided with primarily focusing on the latter, mainly because I was looking to gain a different set of experiences and because I was a little off put by like how volatile the economy and like the tech scene was like in those 4 months that I was there. But I wanted to recruit for consulting like with a tech focus because that was kind of what my background was in. Like I knew a bit about the methodologies. And I also think it tends to be kind of better culture and work-life balance working in tech, which is what led me to recruit for tech consulting and then kind of led me to my most recent internship at Deloitte.
Next question. Why did you want to do consulting and not finance? You're an Ivy girl.
Oh
It's kind
no.
of a fork in the road. You said you went to some finance interviews when you were, looking for finance clubs in your early years at university. So what was your decision to pursue consulting? And maybe could you talk about the typical maybe Ivy fork in the road because it's a
For
feeder
sure.
school for both those careers.
So like I mentioned before, there's kind of like a very hardo, keener like business environment over here, even starting from first year. Like I remember in first year, people asking me, yeah, so are you on the finance or consulting side? And I was like, what is consulting? And like I even remember people in first year being like, yeah, I'm MBB or bust. And I'd be like, what's MBB? Right. But I will say like my kind of quasi decision to pursue consulting did start, I'd say, even in like the first month of school, because everyone was kind of so clearly segmented into finance and consulting buckets. And quite frankly, off the bat, I knew that finance wouldn't be for me, at least not in an investment banking context. I'm not a super quantitatively driven person. I understand that about myself. And like, I'm sure the work can be very interesting, but like my idea of a nightmare is staring at Excel spreadsheets for the whole day. I'd much rather spend my time on PowerPoint, even though it can still be straining. So I was like, great, consulting's my path. And then I kind of learned a lot more about the industry throughout first and second year through whether it be like networking, attending panels, attending events, or even like consulting based competitions, consulting based clubs. And I will say kind of the problem solving driven nature of the industry did really interest me. And the fact that it's kind of industry agnostic and you could do projects within various fields in a given job, that was really fascinating to me. However, I will say in second year, I took a big step back and I sort of asked myself, am I interested in pursuing consulting because like my program and like the peers around me are like pushing me into these two siloed fields, or am I deeply interested in it? Do I have some degree of a passion? Do I feel like my skill sets align? Right. Which is why I didn't go kind of gung ho for consulting internships in second year. I was like, I'm going to go recruit for Clearco, a company that I think is really cool. I really want the opportunity to work at. And I actually started off my internship in recruiting. It moved into more of like an HR strategy or even broader internal strategy role. But like recruiting is super unrelated to consulting, but it was a field that like I'd always been interested in exploring. But then kind of came around to consulting in the path, in the end, sorry, came around to consulting in the end for like a different reason to pursue the same path. I think one of the reasons I'm in consulting right now is quite frankly, I'm not 100% sure what I want to be doing, let's say 5 years down the line. And like consulting does provide that breadth of exposure for like good exit opportunities. I'd say number two is like the people in consulting, like you tend to be working with like pretty ambitious, hardworking peers in like a pretty fast-paced environment, which is the sort of environment that I need to keep myself invigorated, the sort of mentorship that I look for. And then finally, with my focus in tech, like as a non-technical person, I see that there are opportunities to gain like more technical skills, whether as a scrum master or like working closer to the product side within tech consulting. That number one, I think is a useful skill to gain. And number two, I think again, sets me up for potential exit opportunities in the future.
I love how you did go for that second year Clearco internship and you kind of still arrived at the consulting, ambition at the end, which I think is something that I could have done a bit better. Instead, I was like, okay, finance without even knowing if finance was for me. And then I guess it does all work out because now I'm in tech and I'm happy in that. But I think for all of you that are watching that are in your first and second year of university, just know that you do have that third year summer to get your consulting or finance internship. And if there is something that you want to like scratch, like for example, you Zoe, do like tech, startups, recruitment, like try it out. I think second year and first year internships are so underrated. You just finished a 4-month tech consulting internship at Deloitte in Toronto. Hopefully this doesn't bring like too much like PTSD or stress, but from start to finish, including timelines, how did you manage to land it? Did an alum help you? Did you do a lot of cold outreaches, coffee chats? How did you interview prep? How many cases were involved?
Oh gosh. Okay, I can definitely speak like recruiting for Deloitte and also consulting recruiting in general. So something unique about the Ivey program is that the program starts the beginning of third year, which also happens to be the thick of consulting recruiting season. So I will be honest, I think I sacrificed a good amount in first semester, including like going to my section events. Ivey's separated into sections. It's a really weird school. Kind of like making like some friendships that I'm not going to say I missed out on, but I think I could have put more time into during that kind of critical like start of a new program time. But to kind of reel back to your question about timelines, I started like networking and case prepping in, I'd say like August on a more passive level. So August last year, what's that, 13 months ago? So kind of like dipping my toes into like everything case prep, like watching videos, doing like very beginner level cases with my peers, and kind of like passively networking, like not necessarily 10 coffee chats a week kind of a thing, but like reaching out to firms that I was interested in. And then September, October, I'd say were my most intense 2 months of recruiting. So like I mentioned, I kind of let everything else take a backseat, including like my class preparation, in-class participation, my grades, social life. And I was like, I really need to zero in and focus on landing a job, right? So I remember like my Google Cal being so packed because it was just like every day class, and then like I'd be outreaching like literally during class on LinkedIn, like sending out messages to different firms, like case prepping. I think for the internship round, I probably did around 30 cases altogether. So within a span of like 2 to 3 months, which honestly is not that crazy a number. And then so like doing my case prep, like reaching out to upper years for mocks, and of course like coffee chatting, going to like in school like networking events if any firms came to Ivey. And then so that's kind of my broader consulting journey. But how I landed Deloitte was actually something super full circle and almost like a stroke of luck or fate, whatever you call it. But a close upper year friend of mine, we previously worked together on like the Chinese Students Association at Western, as well as on a tech consulting club. He knew that I was recruiting actively, and he was like, hey, Zoe, like I'm going full time to this tech team at Deloitte. Like, I know you worked in tech, like we're on this tech consulting club together. Would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely. That's super up my alley. And then he introed me to like the Ivey grad that he spoke with previously, who was a senior consultant and like had some leveraging power within the recruiting process. So that is the only person at Deloitte that I talked to, or within this team at Deloitte that I talked to, but we got along super well. And I knew that if she was like in a more senior position than me, and like if she was in a position of mentorship for me at the firm within the team, I was like, this is the only culture check I need. You know what I mean? We kind of got along that well. And then from there, submitted an application, got an interview, and then actually got my offer, like I think pretty early into October, which is pretty early into the timeline. Did recruit for a few other firms as well, like full transparency, but kind of chose Deloitte due to like the unique team, as well as due to like that really good networking experience I had.
I think it takes, just one person that you really do relate to feel like you're supported in that firm, even though like you're a student, you've never worked there, maybe you haven't worked like a corporate internship in your life. I think definitely just trying to reach out and see if there's like a natural connection with anyone. I think I love what you said, a culture check. Like I just need this one culture check.
Yeah.
Just do it. Okay, this is kind of a funny question. And for those of you that don't know, I did 2 internships in sales and trading and then just finished off an internship at AWS in tech sales. I have no idea about consulting. So like, what do consultants actually do?
You see, that is the age-old question that no consultant can actually answer. Because I've asked that question many times from first year to up until now. And I've heard consultants are like doctors for businesses, consultants are like psychiatrists for businesses, consultants solve difficult client problems. And I'm like, what does any of this mean? Right? So I think the answer is, unfortunately, it largely depends. But I will say a piece of clarity that I think would have really helped me early into my consulting journey is there's like 2 broader branches of consulting and many sub branches within. Like 1, there's strategy consulting, and 2, there's more transformation or implementation based consulting. So with strategy consulting, that's kind of like the MBBs and like the strategy boutiques of the world. Typically you're working on like shorter client engagements, like from a few weeks to like maximum a few months in timeline. And it's when clients have like a strategic problem that they're not sure kind of how to structure. Could be human resources related, could be a private equity firm like looking to acquire a company and like looking for valuation advice. It can span like a range of industries, but it's you getting in, like speaking with the client leadership team, like maybe interviewing people throughout the company, doing like competitive landscape research, potentially doing like customer research, and then you hand off like some form of a deliverable, typically a PowerPoint deck to the customer, like helping them structure like this early stage strategic problem, right? But then on the other side, which is like implementation or transformation consulting, which is what I did, and to be honest, is the direction the industry at large is moving into, like even with previous pure strategy firms such as MBB, like now doing a lot of implementation work. That's when you kind of see a client through from like that early strategy, like problem solving phase, to the implementation of some sort of like a technology, a system, or even like a series of processes, a series of trainings. So the project that I worked on was like a multi-year tech transformation. I think it's going to go on for 4 years, and I was brought on in like year 2.5. And we were helping our client like build a new technological system from scratch. I can't disclose too much information, but like as a tech team, we had like developers, scrum masters, like quality assurance engineers on the team. And then kind of the role that I played as a business person was like business case, that's what we call it, like doing business case stuff. So kind of connecting like the client leadership to like that tech delivery side of things. And like, yes, still building PowerPoint decks and like structuring deliverables and kind of the strategy behind like all of our Scrum teams and our tech implementation.
Wow, gotcha. Do you know how many people were on that specific project from Deloitte?
Yeah, I think there were like 50 Deloitte resources and then 50 client side, and what do you call it? Like there was another boutique consultancy working with us resources. So like an over 100-person project. That is rare. I will say that's very rare.
Okay. What is the normal or typical number of consultants on a project? Maybe that's just like, maybe you can't answer that, but I don't know.
Again, I will say on strategy projects, it tends to be like a far smaller team. I'd even say like 5 to 10 or like 3 to 10. And during my time at Deloitte, the secondary project I worked on was actually like an early stage pure strategy project. And it was a partner who's like not actively involved in the day-to-day, a senior manager, and then a senior consultant, myself, and a consultant. So 5 people were kind of taking away the partner, like 4 people like actively working on the project. So I will say again, you can't really talk about consulting at large. You need to sort of separate it into those like strategy and implementation branches. And with like a strategy team, it's going to be a small team.
And my non-consulting experience, like from the outside looking in, my picture is that these teams, maybe there's 5 people working on a project, they all come from different locations. Is that true? Like, do they come from, let's say, New York and Chicago and Toronto? Like, do they assemble like the Avengers, or am I tripping?
I feel like my answer to everything for consulting has been, it depends. And unfortunately, it really does. And this, I think, is like a great piece of advice for people like looking to go into consulting, is everyone thinks about like the prestige of the company, like the pay maybe, and then they even think about like culture or industry, but think about staffing model, right? So I know that off the top of my head, I think OW and Kearney are like the most famous Toronto offices for having what they call a regional staffing model or even a global model, where it is assembling like the Avengers, right? And you could be like traveling to New York one month, traveling to like Tennessee the next month, or even to like London, England, in like a more kind of unlikely case, to be honest, and like assembling with like global or like North America wide resources. I know that most consultancies do operate via a more like local based model now. So working on local projects, being staffed with people from your local office. I'd say Deloitte is kind of at an in between. On my project, there were people from various Canadian offices. So I think primarily Calgary, Toronto, and Ottawa, with maybe a couple of Vancouver and Montreal. So again, like I think it really does depend, but like Deloitte itself, I'd say, is more on like a Canada staffing model, or even a local model, to be honest.
Now, you started out in tech startups. How different is it working at a tech startup versus a multinational corporation, arguably one of the most recognizable ones in the world? Did you have culture shock?
Very good question. I will say it was a very different dynamic, not necessarily in a bad way, right? But kind of for context, like my internship at Clearco, again, I've said this before, I think Clearco is like one of the companies with the most unique culture, the most unique and like exuberant leadership in the world. I remember every Monday morning we get on a company-wide like stand-up call, and like our 2 CEOs at the time, so Michelle Romanow and Andrew D'Souza, both like huge personalities. Like Michelle Romanow is literally a TV personality on Dragon's Den. They'd be running the call, and then they'd be like, "What's our company mantra? LFG. Let's fucking go, Clear Crew." And I was like, what is happening? Right? So kind of like going from that culture into like Deloitte, which is obviously like very professional, like kind of like you mentioned, like multinational, like huge mega corporation. Like it was a bit of a shock. But I will say that like I think my team in particular at Deloitte had like great culture. Like I had like senior managers who would like be cool with like using slang in like internal meetings. You know, we'd have like Teams chats like popping off with like GIFs or GIFs, whatever you call them, and like memes and stuff. Like it was like a way more chill culture, for lack of better word, than what I thought it would be. But I think even just the environment, like walking into that big corporate office, like seeing everyone in suits, like being super serious, like talking on business meetings, and then definitely like the client side meeting of things, which like need to have that degree of formality, right? For kind of obviously like professional reasons. It was a bit of a shock. Um, but I think I definitely quickly like learned to like understand it and find those like pockets of more like startup adjacent culture within like a grander firm.
Think it's not like you can't exist in a large corporation. It's finding those pockets and those people that allow you to, I guess, have harmony between your past experiences, what you liked about them, and being in a big firm. We're nearing towards the end of it. Just a few more questions here. You are a director at Front Row Ventures, and you have a background in startups and in tech. Like, let's say down the line, 5 years, 10 years, do you expect that you want to start your own business and venture, or do you want to be a venture capitalist, go back to tech? What are you thinking?
So I am not 100% sure. I think a lot of people look at consulting as like a kind of 2-year, 3-year stint to get you to the next step. And I don't want to say that's my mentality towards consulting. Because again, I did really enjoy my internship experience. I kind of see the value in like staying within the firm or staying within the industry. And I'm keeping an open mind about kind of everything, right? But I definitely would love to work on something entrepreneurial in the future. I think that's a really big goal of mine, like whether it's getting involved in a startup, as ideally like a managerial level or like a more senior level hire with a bit of autonomy over my job. Or like I'd love to be on the founding team of something, like with maybe a group of the people I've met at Ivey, like who knows what's to come, right? And I will say, however, I see myself getting more involved in like the operational side of a startup, or honestly, like even back in like the recruiting or like talent teams kind of like down the line. Like I don't see myself getting involved within like the actual the technical side of like a tech startup. I will never be an amazing software engineer, and I think that's something that I've learned to cope with and deal with. And then kind of same goes for VC. Like love the industry, learned so much through Front Row Ventures, and would definitely recommend this organization to like any first and second years or even like third, fourth years watching. But I could see myself getting involved with the investment side. I'm more so seeing myself getting involved with like the platform side. So like portfolio support, like running ops, again, like even recruiting, like strategy. That's kind of where I see myself.
Gotcha. And I think the same for myself too. And yes, I've also had to cope with the fact that I will probably not be an amazing software engineer. I feel like we all wish we could just be an amazing software engineer, but it doesn't work sometimes. Okay, great. Now, 3 more questions. Zoe, I wanted to have you on this podcast because if there's one word I would use to describe your personality, it is sparkly. Do you sparkle all the time at work? Or maybe this is where my girly pops here. Like me. Is there like are you a chameleon? Is that a chameleon? The one that, blends into like different colors and stuff like that? Like, do you bring the amount of sparkliness to work, outside of work? How do you work with like adopting your different versions of yourself?
I think, to be very frank, this is something that I've struggled with throughout my life, and also like within my past internship, within the last couple of years at business school, in the business environment. And I think it goes beyond like being so-called like sparkly or extroverted, whatever you want to call it. And it goes to like, how do I maintain authenticity while like working towards this goal, or within this macro environment that feels like really professional or like corporately driven. And I really think, kind of like looking back, that the key is like maintaining authenticity, being true to yourself, like showcasing your personality, whatever that may be. And I think whichever firm or whatever person you network with that like doesn't like you for your true self, hey, you're not meant to be. Like, you're not meant to mask who you are in order to fit into this company or to make this person like you. Like, I even remember with coffee chatting, I used to like make a list of questions, like try to be super corporate, try to ask like smart questions that I thought the person like would make the person think, oh, like Zoe really knows her stuff, like she'd be a great hire. And then at one point, like I started going on coffee chats and I'd be like, hey, I noticed that you did like a study abroad program in Paris. Like I'm going to Paris soon. Like, what are your recommendations? Right. And those were some of the best conversations I had because they were genuine, because I wasn't putting on a front. Right. So I think this goes for, again, like networking, for work, for everything. One of the people that I look up to the most in Deloitte is like a female partner who I think did like the best job I've ever seen of like maintaining her personality, like maintaining her spark throughout literally decades of like working in corporate environments. And I think at the beginning of my internship, like I did try to make myself kind of seem more professional. I was like, this is such a big company. Like I need to be here to impress. Right. And again, there are definitely those scenarios where, let's say, like client calls, I'm not going to bust out as an intern and like crack a joke or make a side remark. Right. But I think when I did begin like bringing my true self to work a bit more and like showing like my management, like people who were senior to me, like my true personality, if anything, I think it helped me and it didn't hurt me. Like people accepted me for who I was. They appreciate entry level hires kind of being able to add a bit of enthusiasm
Mhm.
into the workspace. And if anything, that was one of the best pieces of feedback I received end of term was like, Zoe, your enthusiasm is so great. Like it helps bring energy into the workspace. And like, we appreciate this about you.
And I love what you said about that early career, that intern, that new grad, bringing fresh energy. So don't be afraid to show who you are. And like I've interviewed for a variety of different banks, and like I got rejected from some because I guess my energetic like persona and just like excitement, it just they didn't like it. But like at the time I was like, what's wrong with me? But it's no, it's like there are other places that need that energy, that want that energy, and that's where I ended up going. So I think when you're in early years, it's in university, it's very much like, what's wrong with me? There's, I'm inferior, maybe I should be more corporate. But then I think maturing is realizing that there's such value in being like so Elwoods, like like Elwoods energy. I feel like we both have similar Elwoods energy,
For
and
sure.
don't underestimate the power of fun, bright personality. Like it adds something to the team.
Um, yeah, and like one more point I will say is I used to think I was like, this firm is the end all be all. And like I need to change myself to get into this industry or to get into this firm. Like even in first and second year, going kind of so intense into like the case comp scene, like the business club scene, I was like, how can I make my resume like that of a perfect business student? And I was like, how can I turn my personality into that? And then I was like, okay, the goal is not to change yourself in order to fit into a career. Everyone talks about like cultural fit, but like I do think that's the goal, to find like a firm that meshes with you. Like that can be with your skill sets, with your interests, with your personality, your working style. And like I really, really do encourage like any like younger students watching this to like seriously think about that, and again, to not like massage your interests or your personalities in order to fit into a specific field, because I don't think that's a sustainable path, like looking 5-10 years down the line.
No, it's not. And we've been knowing that on this channel. So that's a great piece of advice. First and second years, I hope you take that to heart, okay? Like be who you are. My question kind of ties into what you were just saying, but any advice for students with bright personalities, varying interests, extremely high achieving, perhaps maybe more, because we already touched on like the career side, but maybe
Mhm.
staying calm, achieving balance, success, and having fun. I see on the Be Real, you have fun despite, being so busy. So any advice on that?
I will say it's very difficult, and I don't think I do a great job at kind of having balance. Like I mentioned before, when I was kind of in my like consulting recruiting, like intense recruiting era, my roommates would be like, Zoe, I haven't seen you in 10 days. Where have you been? And I'd be like, 16 hours at the business school building, like literally, right? Did I suffer because of it? 100%. Do I think that at times you do need to prioritize. And let's say it's that like recruiting stage and like, you know, that you really want to like land this job for your future self, or because it will like help put your mind at bay. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, sometimes you have to go through the grind, right? But I think my number one piece of advice would be, don't put all of your self-worth and kind of your sense of achievement and your sense of worth on like these external factors, on like landing a specific job. Because I know that I felt like if I land this specific job, like if I land my big consulting internship, then life is going to be like butterflies and rainbows. But if anything, I think, to be frank, I went through like my darkest mental period like after I landed my job, because I was like, now my life is empty. Like, what am I working towards now?
Mm.
Right? So I think view recruiting and career as like an opportunity to like achieve personal growth instead of just professional growth, because I know that kind of is, I did like another recruiting round during the summer, like prepping for interviews and whatnot. And I was like, hey, like when I take a step back, I'm actually learning from like the case prep that I'm doing. I'm actually having interesting conversations through networking. And again, I viewed it as like a personal growth engine, which I think was a really helpful mindset and perspective shift. And then kind of on your other point about like finding balance between like a variety of different endeavors, like I'm someone that likes to keep busy. Like I'm always jam packing my calendar. But I think it's really like doing things that like matter to you. For example, I've cut down a lot of like the business clubs I used to do. And now like my core business club is Front Row Ventures. And like I'm happy to put in a lot of hours towards it, because at the root and at the end of the day, I know that we're supporting Canadian entrepreneurs who are in university, like supporting student-led startups. That is a mission I will always believe in, even if like one day I'm overwhelmed and I'm like, why am I spending 5 additional hours working on this? Right? So I think it's working on the things that matter to you.
Now, last point here. I feel like many people can relate to you. Where can people connect with you?
um, Reach out to me on LinkedIn, or via email. Let's keep it to LinkedIn.
Let's keep it to
Let's
LinkedIn.
keep it to LinkedIn just in case. Um, I will aim to respond, as I mentioned, very packed calendar for now. But yeah, like would love to connect with like-minded individuals. And I think like if you're looking to connect with like-minded individuals, which I know like I definitely was and like am still actively looking to do, I think there's like a lot of great online communities as well as like campus communities. Um, like join your clubs, join, you know, those communities on campus, look for like Canada-wide opportunities, which is kind of what I did with Front Row. And like, don't just join business clubs. Like I joined the Chinese Students Association, made so many good friends there. I think something else that gets you through like tough times or those like periods of grind is like having people in your corner and having a community to fall back on. So I think that's something that like every university student, or like every person, to be honest, should be aiming to do, is like finding your people.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for coming on to the pod slash video. It was great to have you. It was a long time coming, and I'm sure this will not be the last time on the Chan Chan.
The Chan Chan. Loved being here. Thank you so much, Wynette. Wynette's like a really good friend of mine. Um, and yeah, I wish I had kind of like series like this to refer to when I was, you know, like a couple years back. So I love the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Well, stay tuned, everyone. Next week, we'll have a brand new Friday with Friends. I'm still trying to figure out who that guest should be. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.